hello, 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 hello. Maybe too many hellos. Oh, hello, puppy. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello to you. He's like, yes, that's nice. But what about them treats? Okay. Lo, 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 lo. Lo, 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 farmhouse. Lo, 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 puppy. Lo, 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 lo. I'm a little tired today. I wonder, is that weird? Is that unusual? Sleep's a little tired? Is that out of the ordinary? I think I am more tired than is ordinary. Where'd that puppy go? Oh, there he is. Right. Hiding behind me. Look at that cutie. That cutie puppy. Yeah, you. Yeah, I'm talking about you. So, a needle pulling thread. I was going to talk about the book, but Sharkies aren't here yet. Or if they are, they're sneaky. Sneaky Sharkies. One of the viewers in the chat that I'm sure is probably just a bot is named It's the Fritz, which I'm guessing is Magic School Bus related. I hope it's Magic School Bus related. I feel like that's the best option. I can't think of a cooler Fritz than that. I can't think of another The Fritz, but I mean, there could be one. Oh, and away goes the pup. Down the stairs. Almost thinks that's Frizz, not Frizz. Oh no, you're right. It's Miss Frizzle. Yeah. Did I mention I'm tired? Ah, jeez. Hi, Sharkies. Hello. Hey, yo. How are you doing? On this very fine Wednesday evening. Yeah. Farmhouse had an MRI last night. Yeah. We went to the hospital at 2:30. Well, we left at 2:30 to get there before 3, and then we probably left there at about 3:30ish and got home at like 3:45ish, I would guess. And mini donuts. It's been a few years since I've had mini donuts. When I was a wee lad, my parents live in Cultus Lake, so I grew up in Cultus Lake. And I went to Cultus Lake Elementary School. And so every year, towards the end of the school year, the school had an annual trip to the water slides. um, I didn't really go to the water slides very often, other than that school trip each year. Like, I lived within walking distance of them but I just didn't go. I mean, they're expensive, right? Um, but you know, generally once a year with the school trip, and they had a mini donut booth at the water slides. Um, and I was a lying little snitch as a kid. I'm not snitch, but I was sneaky. I was a lying little sneak as a kid. So I figured early on that, well, first of all, the people who work at the water slides don't care. They work at the water slides. I don't know. I guess it's probably a fun job, but it's also like minimum wage, whatever. Um, and second of all, nobody suspected me because I was tiny and adorable. So I'd go up to the person working at the mini donut stand and I'd be like, "Are those onion rings?" And they'd be like, "No, they're donuts." And I'd be like, "Oh, what are they like?" And then they'd give me samples. Sometimes they'd give me a few. And then I'd go off and go on the water slides for a while, and I'd wait until they switched to a different person working at the mini donut stand, and I'd go up and do it all over again. So that was my scheme, my scam as a child to get free mini donuts at the water slides. Sharky's a genius. Very sneaky, says Farmhouse. Yeah. Morally questionable. Questionable. Probably just morally. I mean, okay. In my defense, no part of my scheme was asking for free samples. I never said, "Can I have some?" I just acted ignorant and waited for them to offer. I don't know if they still have them. I kind of doubt it, but they might. But back then they had like a little mini arcade at the water slides. And I don't know, big electronic cabinets that you're supposed to come up and put your hands on in combination with you've just gotten out of water and are dripping with water was always a weird combo. There's this one that was like a Terminator cabinet and it had like a mounted sort of gun that was pointed at the screen, and so you'd kind of, it was like a machine gun, and so you'd shoot at the screen with this gun, and that thing would shock you every time. Almost doesn't remember an arcade there. It was sort of inside the big wall that was the entrance. Like you'd go in, and then on the left there was, you could kind of go inside the wall, which was also a building. There's an arcade in there. But yeah, it might be long gone at this point because it's a terrible idea. So yeah, I'm quite tired because I slept for a couple hours this morning, just like basically a nap on the couch. But getting home at almost 4 in the morning, if I go to bed at that time, then I'm just gonna keep going to bed at that time night after night. So it's, I just stayed up. Um, so in the last chapter, a slave broke away from some Niessans that were being sold to some Murgos. A slave broke away from being sold to some Murgos by Niessans. The Niessans were not being sold. And jumped in the water and got attacked by giant leeches, and Garion translocated him over onto the dock. He died anyways, the slave, not Garion. Aunt Pole had a stare down with the Murgos and then got very upset with Garion about it. And Garion got very upset in return and called her some horrible things. And yeah, that's kind of, I think, the biggest stuff that happened over the last two chapters. Um, Farmhouse likes fair rides, but Constitution doesn't. Mrs. Sharkey was in high school. She'd never buy cafeteria lunch, but on Nacho Day, they'd have a table of cut up veggies as toppings. We'd go get a plate of free salad. Farmhouse says weird that they actually had self-serve veggies for Nacho Day. Mrs. Sharkey justified it that it wasn't something they charged for, so it was covered by my parents' taxes. Plus, I don't know. I'm not entirely convinced that it's at all ethical to charge for food at schools in the first place. Like I'm kind of all behind the free lunch. That's the closest thing to a scheme you'd pull. I I scheme less uh, now that I'm older and also have money than I did as a kid. As a kid, I had a few schemes. Very, like, I don't think I ever stole anything from a store or anything like that. Um, but, I don't know. I was sneaky occasionally. um, so the next chapter, chapter 26, is only like 3 pages long. So we're probably going to read 2 chapters tonight. Just um, like if we read 2 chapters, that would put us from partway down page 276 through to page 290. So it's about 13 and a half pages. So we'll see how we do. I think I'll get going though because I am sleepy. Oh, Sharky circling back. The fair was fun in spurts, but most of the time was spent in a couple of lines. That's unfortunate. I don't know. I mean, there's a certain atmosphere there, I guess. You can soak in even when you're in a line, maybe. The carnival music type stuff. Farmer says, yeah, that's the problem with good fairs. Popular enough to mean you spend less time doing things. One time, a fair came to like Chilliwack or something like that. It was in Chilliwack or Abbotsford. And somehow I got my hands on like an unlimited access ride pass. But the only ride they had that was worth going on for me at the time, anyways, was the Gravitron. So I just went on the Gravitron over and over and over and over. Because, like, otherwise it was like teacups or Ferris wheel, I guess. I feel like they didn't really have anything else. Sharky saying it's been crappy enough weather lately that today was busy. That makes sense. Heard less music, more just people complaining about people. I'm sorry that there were negative sides to your fair trip. But I am jealous of your mini donuts. I actually had a donut last night because the only thing that I could think of that was open where I could get a coffee was Tim Hortons, which I think is the first time I've been to a Tim Hortons in probably like 4 years. Maybe that's an exaggeration. Maybe there was one stop in there with someone else like 3 years ago or something. So I got a honey cruller because they were out of Boston cream at the time. And I think that's the first donut I've had through this whole pandemic, probably. I don't know how far beyond that. All right. So I'm gonna hop on into chapter 26 because I am quite tired and also a little hungry. Um, I ordered too much food yesterday, so I've got like an entire thing of mapo tofu in the fridge waiting for me that I just didn't even touch yesterday. I had Szechuan beef noodle instead, which was very tasty. Quite spicy, but I don't know. Szechuan spicy is a little different. I don't know. It was a nice mix up. I haven't had good Szechuan for a bit. All right. Chapter 26. By mid afternoon, the clouds had rolled in again, and the thunder began to rumble off in the distance as the rain swept in to drown the steaming city once more. Doesn't this tour sound lovely this time of year? The afternoon thunderstorm seemed to come at the same time each day, and they had even grown accustomed to it. They all moved below deck and sat sweltering as the rain roared down on the deck above them. Isn't that a special kind of miserableness where it's pouring rain and it's like exceedingly hot, so you're just getting steamed? I don't know. Ugh. It's like you can't breathe. Sharky say, once again, Fantasy Florida. Garion sat stiffly, his back planted against a rough-hewn oak rib of the ship. I paused weirdly in there. His back planted against a rough-hewn oak rib of the ship. I don't know what I'm doing. And watched Aunt Pole, his face set stubbornly and his eyes unforgiving. Sharky say steamed hams, anyone? I thought we were having steamed clams. That was a pretty good Chalmers, wasn't it? Varmo says, angst. Aunt Pole, she ignored him and sat talking quietly with Sinedra. Captain Greldick came through the narrow companionway door, his face and beard streaming water. The Drasnian, Droblek, is here, he told them. He says he's got word for you. Send him in, Barak said. Droblek squeezed his vast bulk through the narrow door. He was totally drenched from the rain and stood dripping on the floor. He wiped his face. It's wet out there, he commented. Parmo says there's always someone. We noticed, Hetar said. I've received a message, Droblek told Aunt Pole. It's from Prince Keldar. Finally, she said. He and Belgarath are coming downriver, Droblek reported. As closely as I can make out, they should be here in a few weeks. In a few days. A week at the most. The messenger isn't very coherent. Aunt Pole looked at him inquiringly. Fever, Droblek explained. The man's a Drasnian, so he's reliable. One of my agents at an upcountry trading post. But he's picked up one of the diseases that infest this stinking swamp. He's a little delirious just now. We hope we can break the fever in a day or so and get some sense out of him. I came as soon as I got the general idea of his message. I thought you'd want to know immediately. We appreciate your concern, Aunt Pole said. I'd have sent a servant, Droblek explained, but messages sometimes go astray in this tour, and servants sometimes get things twisted around. He grinned suddenly. That's not the real reason, of course. Aunt Pole smiled. Of course not. A fat man tends to stay in one place and let others do his walking around for him. From the tone of King Rodar's message, I gather that this business might be the most important thing happening in the world just now. I wanted to take part in it. He made a wry face. We all lapse into childishness from time to time, I suppose. He's so honest about it. I just wanted to be part of the story. I feel like my voice for him has changed completely from last time to this time, but I'm okay with the new version. Sharky say I'm liking him even more now. Yeah. Yeah, he's kind of cute, isn't he? Just like... I just wanted to be a part of it. I wanted more lines, that's all. How serious is the condition of the messenger? Aunt Pole asked. Droblek shrugged. Who can say? Half of these pestilential fevers in Nyssa don't even have names, and we can't really tell one from another. Sometimes people die very quickly from them. Sometimes they linger for weeks. Now and then someone even recovers. About all we can do is make them comfortable and see what happens. Starting to sound a bit more Louis Anderson. I don't know about that. I'm Louis Anderson. Farmo says, yes, that's what it was. Maybe my Louis Anderson is too gravelly and too nasally. I'll come at once, Aunt Pole said, rising. Dernick, would you get me the green bag from our packs? I'll need the herbs I have in it. It's not always a good idea to expose oneself to some of these fevers, my lady, Droblek cautioned. I won't be in any danger, she said. I want to question your messenger closely, and the only way I'll be able to get any answers from him is to rid him of his fever. Dernick and I'll come along, Barak offered. She looked at him. It doesn't hurt to be on the safe side, the big man said, belting on his sword. If you wish. She put on her cloak and turned up the hood. This may take most of the night, she told Greldick. There are Grolims about, so have your sailors stay alert. Put a few of the more sober ones on watch. Sober, my lady? That was not the right voice. But I'm going with it. Greldick asked innocently. I've heard the singing coming from the crew's quarters, Captain, she said, a bit primly. Chereks don't sing unless they're drunk. Keep the lid on your ale barrel tonight. Shall we go, Droblek? At once, my lady, the fat man assented, with a sly look at Greldick. Garion felt a certain relief after they had gone. The strain of maintaining his rancor in Aunt Pole's presence had begun to wear on him. He found himself in a difficult position. The horror and self-loathing which had gnawed at him since he had unleashed the dreadful fire upon Shamdar in the Wood of the Dryads had grown until he could scarcely bear it. He looked forward to each night with dread, for his dreams were always the same. Over and over again he saw Shamdar, his face burned away, pleading, Master, have mercy! And over again he saw the awful blue flame that had come from his own hand in answer to that agony. The hatred he had carried since Val Elorn had died in that flame. His revenge had been so absolute that there was no possible way he could evade or shift the responsibility for it. His outburst that morning had been directed almost more at himself than at Aunt Pole. He had called her a monster, but it was the monster within himself he hated. The dreadful catalogue of what she had suffered over uncounted years for him, and the passion with which she had spoken, evidence of the pain his words had caused her, twisted searingly in his mind. He was ashamed. So ashamed that he could not even bear to look into the faces of his friends. He sat alone and vacant-eyed, with Aunt Pole's words thundering over and over in his mind. Sharky say, and there it is. The trauma, the self-loathing? Or was it something else? The rain slackened on the deck above them as the storm passed. Swirling little eddies of raindrops ran across the muddy surface of the river in the fitful wind. The sky began to clear, and the sun sank into the roiling clouds, staining them an angry red. Garion went up on deck to wrestle alone with his troubled conscience. Sharky say that he thinks of himself as the monster. And Pharma says self-awareness. After a while, he heard a light step behind him. I suppose you're proud of yourself? Sinedra asked acidly. Of course she did. Leave me alone. I don't think so. I think I want to tell you just exactly how we all felt about your little speech this morning. How we all felt. I don't want to hear about it. That's too bad. I'm going to tell you anyway. I won't listen. Oh, yes, you will. She took him by the arm and turned him around. Her eyes were blazing, and her tiny face filled with a huge anger. What you did was absolutely inexcusable, she said. Your aunt raised you from a baby. She's been a mother to you. My mother's dead. The Lady Bulgara's the only mother you ever knew, and what did you give her for your thanks? You called her a monster. You accused her of not caring. I'm not listening to you, Garion cried. Knowing that it was childish, even infantile, he put his hands over his ears. The Princess Sinedra always seemed to bring out the worst in him. Move your hands, she commanded in a ringing voice. You're going to hear me even if I have to scream. I don't know if I can do this. Garion, afraid that she meant it, took his hands away. That's... oh boy. She carried you when you were a baby, Sinedra went on, seeming to know exactly where the sorest spot on Garion's wounded conscience lay. She watched your very first steps. She fed you, she watched over you, she held you when you were afraid or hurt. Does that sound like a monster? She watches you all the time, did you know that? If you even so much as stumble, she almost reaches out to catch you. I've seen her cover you when you're asleep. Does that sound like someone who doesn't care? You're talking about something you don't understand, Garion told her. Please, just leave me alone. Please, she repeated mockingly. What a strange time for you to remember your manners. I didn't hear you saying please this morning. I didn't hear a single please. I didn't hear any thank yous either. Do you know what you are, Garion? You're a spoiled child. That's what you are. That did it. To have this pampered, willful little princess call him a spoiled child was more than Garion could bear. Infuriated, he began to shout at her. Most of what he said was wildly incoherent, but the shouting made him feel better. They started with accusations, but the arguments soon degenerated into name-calling. Sinedra was screeching like a Kamar fishwife, and Garion's voice cracked and warbled between a manly baritone and a boyish tenor. Oh, we've got puberty voice changes going on. That's the first time that's been pointed out. I've been wondering when I'd have to adjust his voice. They shook their fingers in each other's faces and shouted. Sinedra stamped her feet, and Garion waved his arms. All in all, it was a splendid little fight. Garion felt much better when it was over. Yelling insults at Sinedra was an innocent diversion compared to some of the deadly things he'd said to Aunt Pole that morning, and it allowed him to vent his confusion and anger harmlessly. Harmlessly, huh? In the end, of course, Sinedra resorted to tears and fled, leaving him feeling more foolish than ashamed. He fumed a bit, muttering a few choice insults he hadn't had the opportunity to deliver. And then he sighed and leaned pensively on the rail to watch the night settle in over the dank city. I love that whole scene. It's just so self-aware. Leaning on the rail, looking out over the city. That's the angst farmhouse. Yeah. Though he would not have cared to admit it, Farmer says, pensive railing leaning is almost always angsty. Yeah, that's true. Though he would not have cared to admit it, even to himself, he was grateful to the princess. Their descent into absurdity had cleared his head. Quite clearly now he saw that he owed Aunt Pole an apology. He had lashed out at her out of his own sense of deep-seated guilt, trying somehow to shift the blame to her. Quite obviously, there was no way to evade his own responsibility. Having accepted that, he seemed for some reason to feel better. It grew darker. The tropical night was heavy, and the smell of rotting vegetables and stagnant water rolled in out of the trackless swamps. A vicious little insect crawled down inside his tunic and began to bite him somewhere between his shoulders where he could not reach. There was absolutely no warning. No sound or lurch of the ship or any hint of danger. His arms were seized from behind and a wet cloth was pressed firmly over his mouth and nose. He tried to struggle, but the hands holding him were very strong. He tried to twist his head to get his face clear enough to shout for help. The cloth smelled strange, cloying, sickeningly sweet, thick somehow. He began to feel dizzy, and his struggles grew weaker. He made one last effort before the dizziness overcame him, and he sank down into unconsciousness. And bingo! Pharma says, hey, it's been a while since he was last kidnapped, or since he was kidnapped, and Sharky say, good for Garion, he's going longer between kidnappings. Yeah, when was the last time he was kidnapped? He got dragged away briefly in Arendia. When they were at that campsite, they got attacked by bandits. He got dragged off, but he was quickly retrieved by Barak. I think that was probably... Did he get kidnapped in... I don't think he got kidnapped in Tolnedra at all. I think Garion went through an entire country without getting kidnapped. Wow. I'm proud of him. Oh, unless you count him getting taken with everybody. Because they all got taken in Tolnedra to that noble's dungeon. So, Pharma says that doesn't count. I don't know. Yeah. A group abduction versus an individual. He was captured, but he wasn't taken from everybody else. So yeah, maybe that doesn't count. So aside from that, Arendia, I think, is the most recent time, and even that was relatively brief. Sharkies would kind of count it. Yeah, it's sort of a half. It's, I mean, they didn't take him specifically, right? They took him with the group. So that wasn't, it's, you know, I think it's like a half measure. It's like a 0.5 kidnapping. Anyways, that was all of chapter 26. Quite a short chapter. Sarky say he got kidnapped, but so did everyone else. I see, at that point, I don't know if it falls under the definition of kidnapping, especially considering, like, it's not that adults can't get kidnapped, but when an armed group is taken captive, I don't think it counts as a kidnapping. Sharky say, and they were all restrained by Chamdar before Garion burned him. Yes, but they weren't taken anywhere. So again, I don't know if that counts. So he's had 2 near kidnappings. Yeah, and I mean, when they were in the dungeon in Tolnedra, I think it was mentioned, like, I think maybe the torturers said that the only ones they had to keep alive were, like, Antpol, Belgarath, and Garion. So he was being targeted to be taken away there, just they never got to it. So that was definitely a near kidnapping, in that the intent was to take him away. And likewise with the Grand Duke, and with Chamdar, the intent again was to take him and Aunt Pole away. So intent, just no follow through. All right, I'm gonna jump right on into chapter 27. They were in a long hallway of some sort. Garion could see the flagstone floor quite clearly. 3 men were carrying him face down, and his head bobbed and swung on his neck uncomfortably. That's a strange... 3 men were carrying him? Like, do 2 of them have his arms and one's got his legs? That's, I don't know, that seems kind of awkward. Especially considering most of the time 1 person is enough to carry Garion. So maybe it means that someone's carrying him, but there are 3 people with him total. But the way it's phrased, 3 men were carrying him, sounds like all 3 are involved in carrying him. His mouth was dry, and the thick, sweet smell that had impregnated the cloth they had crushed to his face lingered. He raised his head, trying to look around. "He's awake," the man holding one of his arms said. Okay, I guess it's actually 3 people. "Finally," one of the others muttered. "You held the cloth to his face too long, Issus." "I know what I'm doing," the first one said. "Put him down." Can you stand? Isus asked Garion. His shaved head was stubbled, and he had a long scar running from his forehead to his chin, directly through the puckered vacancy of an empty eye socket. His belted robe was stained and spotted. Get up, Isus ordered in a hissing kind of voice. I don't know how you hiss get up. There's no sibilance in those two words. He nudged Garion with his foot. Ah, I see. Sharkies were picturing one on each arm, one on the legs, yeah. Garion struggled to rise. His knees were shaky, and he put his hand on the wall to steady himself. The stones were damp and covered with a kind of mold. Not moss, huh? Mold. Blech. Through gritted teeth. Get up. Get up. Maybe that's how I'll do Isus's voice, is gritted teeth from now on. Bring him, Isus told the others. I don't know if it sounds very different. They took Garion's arms and half-dragged, half-carried him down the damp passageway behind the one-eyed man. When they came out of the corridor, they were in a vaulted area that seemed not so much like a room, but rather like a large, roofed place. This is a strange distinction. Doesn't seem like a room, it just seems like a large, roofed place. I guess missing the walls? Does sound different? Okay. Huge pillars, covered with carvings, supported the soaring ceiling, and small oil lamps hung on long chains from above, or sat on little stone shelves on the pillars. There was a confused sense of movement, as groups of men in varicolored robes drifted from place to place in a kind of languorous stupor. You, Asus snapped at a plump young man with dreamy eyes. Tell Sadi, the chief eunuch, that we have the boy. Tell him yourself, the young man said in a piping voice. I don't take orders from your kind, Isus. Isus slapped the plump young man sharply across the face. You hit me, the plump one wailed, putting his hand to his mouth. You made my lip bleed. See? He held out his hand to show the blood. If you don't do what I tell you to do, I'll cut your fat throat, Isus told him in a flat, unemotional voice. Well, I didn't get that across. I missed the unemotional part. I'm going to tell Sadi what you did. Go ahead, and as long as you're there, tell him that we've got the boy the Queen wanted. The plump young man scurried away. Eunuchs, one of the men holding Garion's arm spat. They have their uses, the other said with a coarse laugh. Ugh. Bring the boy, Isus ordered. Sadi doesn't like to be kept waiting. They pulled Garion across the lighted area. A group of wretched-looking men with unkempt hair and beards sat chained together on the floor. Water, one of them croaked. Please. He stretched out an imploring hand. Isus stopped to stare at the slave in amazement. Why does this one still have his tongue? Its tongue, he demanded of the guard who stood over the slaves. The guard shrugged. We haven't had time to attend to that yet. Take time, Isus told him. If one of the priests hear it talk, they'll have you questioned. You wouldn't like that. I'm not afraid of the priests, the guard said, but he looked nervously over his shoulder. Be afraid, Isis advised him. And what are these animals? They're no good to anybody dead. He started to lead the men holding Garion through a shadowy area between two pillars, then stopped again. Get out of my way, he said to something lying in the shadows. Grudgingly, the thing began to move. With revulsion, Garion realized that it was a large snake. Get over there with the others, Isis told the snake. He pointed toward a dimly lighted corner where a large mass seemed to be undulating, moving with a kind of sluggish seething. Faintly, Garion could hear the dry hiss of scales rubbing together. The snake, which had barred their way, flicked a nervous tongue at Isis, then slithered toward the dim corner. Someday you're going to get bitten, Isis, one of the men warned. They don't like being ordered around. Isis shrugged indifferently and moved on. Sadie wants to talk to you, the plump young eunuch said spitefully to Isis as they approached a large polished door. I told him that you hit me. Maz is with him. Good, Isis said. He pushed the door open. Sadie, he called sharply, tell your friend I'm coming in. I don't want him making any mistakes. He knows you, Isis, a voice on the other side of the door said. He won't do anything by mistake. Isis went in and closed the door behind him. You can leave now, one of the men holding Garion told the young eunuch. The plump one sniffed. I go when Sadie tells me to go. And come running when Sadie whistles, too. That's between Sadie and me, isn't it? Bring him in, Isis ordered, opening the door again. The two men pushed Garion into the room. We'll wait out here, one of them said nervously. Sharky say, he won't do anything by mistake. That was still vaguely threatening. Yeah, yeah, he might do something on purpose, is the implication. We'll wait out here, one of them said nervously. Isis laughed harshly, pushed the door shut with his foot, and pulled Garion to the front of a table where a single oil lamp flickered with a tiny flame that barely held back the darkness. A thin man with dead-looking eyes sat at the table, lightly stroking his hairless head with the long fingers of one hand. Can you speak, boy? He asked Garion. His voice had a strange contralto quality to it. I don't know what contralto is. I know the context of contralto. I know, it probably fits in with falsetto. Okay, so like higher pitched. And his silk robe was a solid crimson rather than varicolored. Sharky say contralto is slightly higher than tenor. All right. Could I have a drink of water? Garion asked. In a minute. I'll take my money now, Sadie, Isis said. As soon as we're sure this is the right boy, Sadie replied. Ask it what its name is. Was that understandable? A hissing whisper said from the darkness behind Garion. I will, Maz. Sadie looked faintly annoyed at the suggestion. I've done this before. You're taking too long, the whisper said. Say your name, boy, Sadi told Garion. Dorun, Garion lied quickly. I'm really very thirsty. Do you take me for a fool, Isus? Sadi asked. Did you think just any boy would satisfy me? This is the boy you told me to fetch, Isus said. I can't help it if your information was wrong. You say your name is Dorun? Sadi asked. Yes, Garion said. I'm the cabin boy on Captain Greldick's ship. Where are we? I'll ask the questions, boy, Sadi said. It's lying. The sibilant whisper came from behind Garion. Yeah, if it wasn't creepy enough already, it's behind you. The next thing it's going to say is, don't turn around. Don't look behind you. I know that, Maz, Sadi replied calmly. They always do at first. We don't have time for all this, the hiss said. Give it Oret. I need the truth immediately. That was O-R-E-T, Oret. If you didn't recognize the word, it's because it's probably made up, I would assume. Whatever you say, Mas, Sadi agreed. Pharma says I assumed it was some kind of potion thing. Yeah, or herb. Something like that. Whatever you say, Mas, Sadi agreed. He rose to his feet and disappeared momentarily into the shadows behind the table. Garion heard a clink and then the sound of water pouring. Remember that this was your idea, Mas. If she becomes angry about it, I don't want to be the one she blames. She'll understand, Sadi. Here, boy, Sadi offered, coming back into the light and holding out a brown earthenware cup. No, thank you, Garion said. I guess I'm not really thirsty after all. They weren't exactly subtle. You might as well drink it, boy, Sadi told him. If you don't, Isis will hold you down and I'll pour it down your throat. It isn't going to hurt you. Drink, the hissing voice commanded. Better do as they say, Isis advised. Helplessly, Garion took the cup. The water had a strangely bitter taste and seemed to burn his tongue. Much better, Sadi said, resuming his seat behind the table. Now, you say your name is Dorun? Yes. Where are you from, Dorun? Sandaria? Where exactly in Sandaria? Near Doreen, on the north coast. What are you doing on a Cherek ship? Captain Greldick's a friend of my father, Garion said. For some reason, he suddenly wanted to explain further. My father wanted me to learn about ships. He says that being a sailor's better than being a farmer. Captain Greldick agreed to teach me what I'd need to know to be a sailor. He says I'll be good at it because I don't even get seasick, and I'm not afraid to climb up the ropes that hold the sails in place, and I'm almost strong enough to pull an oar already, and... What did you say your name was, boy? Garion. Dorun. Yes, Dorun. And how old are you, Garion? 15 last Aristide. Garion's 15 last Aristide, everybody! In case anyone was wondering, we actually got an answer on that. We still don't know about Sinedra, but Garion's 15 last Aristide. Pharma says, we have an actual age, though not for Sinedra. Yeah. So I guess I think this is another world where everybody is considered a year older on the same day. Like everybody's birthday is Aristide. There's something similar to that. I believe in Wizard of Earthsea. I think in Earthsea, I think it's the same way. And I think in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, it might be the same way. And in Magician Apprentice, Magician Master, the Magician cycle of books, I think it's also the same way. Well, now that I say that, I'm less certain about Wizard of Earthsea. I think it might be, but I'm not certain if I'm getting those two confused on the scene I'm thinking of. So you say, other than she's not 16 yet. And the Giver is like that too. All right. Not that this is confirmation of that in this world, but based on that, the way he marked it, I would guess that's the case. 15 last Aristide. Aunt Pole says that people who are... No, never mind. Instantly. The next sentence. Why do I keep doing this? I feel like this keeps happening. Aunt Pole says that people who are born on Aristide are very lucky, only I haven't noticed that I'm luckier than... And who is Aunt Pole? He was just born on Aristide. I mean, that doesn't disprove that theory, but it makes it far less likely. Ugh. Just feel like I keep doing that, where I'm like, this thing, and then the next sentence addresses the thing I was just talking about. I mean, sometimes it confirms it, but in this case, not so much. And who is Aunt Pole? She's my aunt. We used to live on Faldor's farm, but Mr. Wolf came and we... Do people call her something besides Aunt Pole? King Fulrak called her Polgara. That was when Captain Brendig took us all to the palace in Sendar. Then... He remembers Captain Brendig. Then we went to King Anheg's palace in Valalorn, and... Who's Mr. Wolf? My grandfather. They call him Belgarath. I didn't used to believe it, but I guess it has to be true, because one time he... And why did you all leave Faldor's farm? I didn't know why at first, but then I found out that it was because Zedard stole the Orb of Aldor off the pommel of the Sword of the Reven King, and we've got to get it back before Zedar can take it to Torak and wake him up, and... This is the boy we want, the hissing voice whispered. You think? Garion just dropping every, earth-shaking secret in the world right here. Garion turned around slowly. The room seemed brighter now, as if the tiny flame were putting out more light. In the corner, rearing out of its own coils and with a strangely flattened neck and glowing eyes, was a very large snake. We can take it to Selmisra now, the snake hissed. It lowered itself to the floor and crawled across to Garion. He felt its cold, dry nose touch his leg, and then, though a hidden part of his mind shrieked, he stood, unresisting, as the scaly body slowly mounted his leg and coiled upward until the snake's head reared beside his face, and its flickering tongue touched his face. Be very good, boy, the snake hissed in his ear. Very, very good. The reptile was heavy, and its coils thick and cold. This way, boy, Sadi told Garion, rising to his feet. I want my money, Isus demanded. Oh, Sadi said, almost contemptuously. That. It's in that pouch there on the table. Then he turned and led Garion from the room. Garion, the dry voice that had always been in his mind, spoke quietly to him. I want you to listen carefully. Don't say anything or let anything show on your face. Just listen to me. Who are you? Garion asked silently, struggling with the fog in his brain. You know me, the dry voice told him. Now, listen. They've given you something that makes you do what they want you to do. Don't fight against it. Just relax and don't fight it. But I said things I shouldn't have. That doesn't matter now. Just do as I say. If anything happens and it starts to get dangerous, don't fight. I'll take care of it, but I can't do it if you're struggling. You have to relax so that I can do what has to be done. If you suddenly find yourself doing things or saying things you don't understand, don't be afraid and don't try to fight. It won't be them, it will be me. Comforted by this silent reassurance, Garion walked obediently beside Sadi the eunuch, while the coils of the snake, Maz, lay heavily about his chest and shoulders, and the bluntly pointed reptilian head rested, almost nuzzling, against his cheek. They entered a large room where the walls were heavily draped, and crystal oil lamps hung glittering on silver chains. An enormous stone statue, its upper third lost in the shadows high above, raised its mass titanically at the end of one of... Benedict? A big vehicle went by outside and apparently he got upset. I'm going to mute the microphone for a moment. Alright, never mind. Puppy didn't like the giant statue. Alright, let me go back to that. An enormous stone statue, its upper third lost in the shadows high above, raised its mass titanically at one end of the room, and directly in front of the statue was a low stone platform, carpeted and strewn with cushions. Upon the platform stood a heavy divan that was not quite a chair and not quite a couch. There was a woman on the divan. Her hair was raven black, cascading in loose coils down her back and across her shoulders. About her head was an intricately wrought golden crown, sparkling with jewels. I just decided I needed to change my position here. No reason. Her gown was white and spun of the filmiest gauze. It did not in any way conceal her body, but rather seemed to be worn only to provide a material to which her jewels and adornments could be attached. Beneath the gauze, her skin was almost chalky white, and her face was extraordinarily beautiful. Her eyes were pale, even colorless. A large, gold-framed mirror stood on a pedestal at one side of the divan, and the woman lounged at ease, admiring herself in the glass. As it doesn't focus. Divan? Not divan? I feel like I'm mucking up the pronunciations of a few things due to tiredness. Or not the pronunciations, but the emphasis. I've had trouble with emphasis a few times. Two dozen shaven-headed eunuchs in crimson robes knelt in a cluster to one side of the dais, resting on their haunches and gazing at the woman and the statue behind her with worshipful adoration. Sharky say the scale of the statue is wrong. Yeah, I'm going to imagine that there's a larger version, because this one it feels like if she stood up, she'd be maybe up to its shoulders, and that's definitely not what's supposed to be the case. So yeah, the statue definitely not quite right. Just there's this, but then there's another really big one behind it. That's what's happening, right? Farmer says kind of like the van, so divan. Divan. Maybe I'll just never need to say it again. Among the cushions at the side of the divan. In my defense, this one was obvious. Like, of course, I was going to get shot down immediately by the book for that one. I was expecting this time. But it is funny that it was like 5 words later. I guess slightly more than 5, but still. Among the cushions at the side of the divan, lolled, and that's a word I feel like I don't see very often, lolled. I feel like I'm more likely to see like lollygagging than just lolled. Not that kind of lolled. Lolled an indolent, pampered-looking young man whose head was not shaved. His hair was elaborately curled, his cheeks were rouged, and his eyes were fantastically made up. It's bizarre to me how often people can't spell rogue. Like, how frequently rogue becomes rouge. It just seems like a strangely common misspelling. Check, you say I could try divan next time. Divan? You don't like divan? Divan? Farmo says the gue is something we don't see super often. And rouge comes up as spelled correctly for computers. Yeah. Yeah. Although, to be fair, I most often saw it misspelled as rouge back when I played like World of Warcraft 20 years ago. That's an exaggeration. 18 years ago. And that didn't have autocorrect in it. It was just people misspelling rogue. Shucky say, or Devon, whatever you like. She lounged on the Devon. I wonder what this guy's name is. It better not be Devon. The Vane. His hair was elaborately curled, his cheeks were rouged, and his eyes were fantastically made up. He wore only the briefest of loincloths, and his expression was bored and sulky. The woman absently ran the fingers of one hand through his curls as she watched herself in the mirror. There's a little bit of gender role swapping there. Farmos is imagining stars and unicorns drawn on his eyes fantastically. The queen has visitors, one of the kneeling eunuchs announced in a sing-song voice. Ah, the others chanted in unison. Visitors! Hail, eternal Salmisra, Sadi the eunuch said, prostrating himself before the dais and the pale-eyed woman. What is it, Sadi? She demanded. Her voice was vibrant and had a strange, dark timbre. It's timbre, right? T-I-M-B-R-E is still pronounced timbre. Pharma says, if I were more glammy in my dressing style, I'd have stars and unicorns on my eyes. Timbre? It's pronounced timbre? That's one of those ones I think I've only ever read in my head. I had not... Timbre. Alright. The boy, my queen, Sadi announced, his face still pressed to the floor. On your knees before the Serpent Queen, the snake hissed in Garion's ear. The coils tightened about Garion's body, and he fell to his knees in their sudden crushing grip. Come here, Maz, Salmisra said to the snake. Sharky say it's pronounced timbre just to mess with people. Musical terms are like that. Farmo says there's a band called Timber Timbre. Nice. The queen summons the beloved serpent, the eunuch intoned. Ah! The reptile uncoiled itself from about Garion's body and undulated up to the foot of the divan, reared half its length above the reclining woman, and then lowered itself upon her body, its thick length curving, fitting itself to her. The blunt head reached up to her face, and she kissed it affectionately. The long, forked tongue flickered over her face, and Maas began to whisper sibilantly in her ear. She lay in the embrace of the serpent, listening to its hissing voice, and looking at Garion with heavy-lidded eyes. Then, pushing the reptile aside, the queen rose to her feet and stood over Garion. Welcome to the land of the snake people, Belgarion, she said in her purring voice. The name, which he had heard only from Aunt Pole before, sent a strange shock through Garion, and he tried to shake the fog from his head. Not yet, the dry voice in his mind warned him. The Sharky say there's a lot of uncomfortable imagery happening here. Yep. They live a certain lifestyle here in the palace of this tour. Salmisra stepped down from the dais, her body moving with a sinuous grace beneath her transparent gown. She took one of Garion's arms and drew him gently to his feet. Then she touched his face lingeringly. Her hand seemed very cold. A pretty young man, she breathed, almost as if to herself. So young, so warm. Her look seemed somehow hungry. A strange confusion seemed to fill Garion's mind. The bitter drink Sadi had given him still lay on his consciousness like a blanket. Beneath it, he felt at once afraid, and yet strangely attracted to the queen. Her chalky skin and dead eyes were repellent. Yet there was a kind of lush invitation about her, an overripe promise of unspeakable delights. Unconsciously, he took a step backward. Sharky, I feel like a half-naked queen with a giant snake coiled around her is the stuff of the sides of 1980s vans. Yeah, I mean, have you seen this cover art? Like, it would fit right in on the side of a van, for sure. Don't be afraid, my Belgarian, she purred at him. I won't hurt you, not unless you want me to. Your duties here will be very pleasant, and I can teach you things that Polgara hasn't even dreamed of. Come away from him, Selmisra, the young man on the dais ordered petulantly. I had to. You know I don't like it when you pay attention to others. Sharky, big yikes, I guess, regarding what she had said. Farmos is very excited about the voice. A flicker of annoyance showed in the queen's eyes. She turned and looked rather coldly at the young man. What you like or don't like doesn't really concern me anymore, Essia, she said. What? Essia cried incredulously. Do as I say at once. No, Essia, she told him. I'll punish you, he threatened. No, she said, you won't. That sort of thing doesn't amuse me anymore, and all your pouting and tantrums have begun to grow boring. Leave now. Leave? Essia's eyes bulged with disbelief. You're dismissed, Essia. Dismissed? But you can't live without me. You said so yourself. We all say things we don't mean sometimes. The arrogance went out of the young man like water pouring from a bucket. He swallowed hard and began to tremble. When do you want me to come back? He whined. I don't, Essia. Never? He gasped. Never, she told him. Now go and stop making a scene. What's to become of me? Essia cried. He began to weep, the makeup around his eyes running in grotesque streaks down his face. Don't be tiresome, Essia, Selmisra said. Pick up your belongings and leave. Now! I have a new consort. She stepped back up on the dais. The queen has chosen a consort, the eunuch intoned. Ah, the others chanted. Hail the consort of eternal Selmisra, most fortunate of men. The sobbing young man grabbed up a pink robe and an ornately carved jewel box. He stumbled down from the dais. You did this, he accused Garion. It's all your fault. Suddenly, out of the folds of the robe draped over his arm, he pulled a small dagger. I'll fix you, he screamed, raising the dagger to strike. There was no thought this time, no gathering of will. The surge of force came without warning, pushing Essia away, driving him back. He slashed futilely at the air with his little knife. Then the surge was gone. Essia lunged forward again, his eyes insane and his dagger raised. The surge came again, stronger this time. The young man was spun away. He fell, and his dagger clattered across the floor. Selmisra, her eyes ablaze, pointed at the prostrate Essia and snapped her fingers twice. So fast that it seemed almost like an arrow loosed from a bow, a small green snake shot from beneath the divan, its mouth agape and its hiss a kind of snarl. It struck once, hitting Essia on the leg, then slithered quickly to one side and watched with dead eyes. Essia gasped and turned white with horror. He tried to rise, but his legs and arms suddenly sprawled out from under him on the polished stones. He gave one strangled cry, and then the convulsions began. His heels pattered rapidly on the floor, and his arms flailed wildly. His eyes turned vacant and staring, and a green froth shot like a fountain from his mouth. His body arched back, every muscle writhing beneath his skin, and his head began to pound on the floor. He gave one thrashing, convulsive leap, his entire body bounding up from the floor. When he came down, he was dead. Selmisra watched him die, her pale eyes expressionless, incurious, with no hint of anger or regret. "Justice is done," the eunuch announced. "Swift is the justice of the Queen of the Serpent People," the others replied. And that's the end of chapter 27. And it's 8:22, so I'm going to stop there. We're on we just finished page 290 out of 322. Getting real close. 32 pages to go. That's not very much. Yep, that was a creepy, unsettling, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like David Eddings really tries to drive home the, like, depravity sort of angle. Harmo says, how is Garion going to get out of this one? Well, he's got that dry voice that's potentially going to help him out. But, yeah. He's at least still able to defend himself, at least somewhat. That, like, her, pointing and snap, snap, and then snake, snip, and then dead is, I don't know, creepy. Just a lot of creepiness here in Nyissa. Garion's still drugged. Norma says, I stab you, Hank. I try again, Hank. Except I don't know if there was a Hank in this one. I think that was the thing, was like, he didn't gather any will. It just, whoosh, he got pushed away. So, I don't know. I wonder if there's a sound. Maybe there is. Chucky say, just a few pages in, I thought it might have been amusing to hear the eunuch followers as the Brotherhood from Guards. I feel like Essia was getting close there to being as comic as them. Oh boy. The elucidated brethren of the Ebon Night. What a great, like, group to have in that book. Just so much setup for, like, so much potential for goofy scenes. Like, take your typical black-robed death cult and make them completely incompetent. Distinct personalities, and they're all just, recognize that these are all just people that live in this town. They're not, I don't know, faceless, death-obsessed, you know, single personality goons. Sharky say it was extra creepy that Selmisra called him my Belgarian. Yeah. I'm like, see, because I was kind of thinking that while I was reading this time, but I wonder if that's somewhat exaggerated by the fact that I'm reading it out loud, and so I'm having to do the voices, and I don't have that much of a repertoire for female voices. So I was thinking to myself that, oh, she kind of sounds a little bit like Polgara, and I don't know if I'm wondering if that probably lent to making it sound a little creepier. Although she did draw certain parallels herself. You know, I could teach you things that Polgara hasn't even dreamed of. Implies that, I don't know, that Garion and Polgara could possibly have that kind of relationship, which, no. Oh, although maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. I missed kind of what you said at the end. It feels like she wants him for no other reason than she gets to take him from Polgara. Yeah, that's fair. Or says there's a scene in Futurama where a bunch of pyramid worshipping, apparently Earth Egypt imitating guys intone together, which this reminded me of. Free us from thought and responsibility, one guy. We're dumb. Everybody else together. So I think I kind of misunderstood what you were saying, Sharkies, because I was sort of thinking that it felt like there were kind of weird parallels between Selmisra and Polgara. Like there were supposed to be similarities there. But that might be somewhat exaggerated by me reading them in kind of a similar-ish voice. Well, I think I need to go eat some mapo tofu. Mapo tofu. Mapo tofu is one of the most popular classic Sichuan dishes. It has a spicy, pungent, and appetizing flavor that goes perfectly with steamed rice. It's in sort of a red sauce. So more, it's not, it honestly doesn't look white at all. Oh, what? Oh, no. I missed your previous sentence about the dog. So I just thought you were saying little and white and talking about mapo tofu. I was talking about there was a tiny dog named Tofu that we saw the other day. Yeah. Just the dog. All right. Have a great night, everybody. I'll see you on Friday, and I will hopefully be much more rested by then. I gotta do some serious D&D planning between now and then because I've got the game on Saturday. Oh, how did your game go? Tell me about your game on Friday. Tell me about your game on Friday. That's over by now, right? That was last weekend? All right. Okay. Don't tell me about it now, though. If you're typing about it now, stop, erase it. Tell me about it on Friday. All right. Have a good night. I'll see you on Friday. I'm going to go eat and then sleep. Probably pretty close together. Okay, bye.